We are here today to reintroduce the Longfin Dace to the lower part of the Santa Cruz River here in Tucson. So this is a fish species that historically was really abundant in the river all through Tucson. And then when the river dried up in 1913, 1914, that spelled the end of our local Longfin Dace population. Oh, look at all that water. So we went out this morning with Arizona Game and Fish and Pima County biologists out to Cienega Creek to the natural preserve area that the county owns. First haul, and then brought with some nets as well. So we had what are called seine nets, which are basically two poles with a long series of net in between. And a person stands on either side holding the poles and walks through the water and scoops up the fish. So we did that at Cienega Creek and captured about 600 longfin dace there, and it took about an hour and a half or so to do that.
We want to keep the fish in the water as much as possible.
Then we put them in the buckets and filled the buckets with water.
6,
7, 8.
Put a little aerator in the bucket, a little bubbler, so the fish had enough oxygen while they were being transported in these buckets. And then hiked about a half mile back to our vehicles, and then we drove them here about a 45-minute drive. The main things you have to worry about with transporting fish are temperature and oxygen of the water. So temperature is 19.7 degrees Celsius. If the fish are in warm water when they're being transported, that gives them some stress. And when the oxygen levels are low, just like us, they have a hard time breathing. So we really want to make sure that the tanks that Arizona Game and Fish have are really well insulated to kind of keep the temperature stable and lower while they're being transported, and then the bubblers help to keep oxygen in the water.
we have some buckets so you can add like a little water in.
They are a little bit sensitive. I drive the same way I normally would, but I always do kind of feel like I should be like extra gentle while I'm driving the fish. It's like you have a taxi or you're like an Uber driver, but you have 600 fish.
32.
Okay, 33, 34, 35, 36. If you took us and then you know, just kind of transported us somewhere else and it was, you know, totally different conditions, we might be a little bit frazzled. So it's a lot of trying to decrease stress as much as possible, and you hope for high survival rates in their new home. So if it continues to dry before we get monsoons, those fish could potentially just dry up. So in one way, we're kind of salvaging those fish.
What was the count in that bucket you just finished off, Nate?
62.
The longfin dace has been a target for a while because the habitat, especially that we have here in the Corazon or the Agua Nueva Reach, is pretty ideal longfin dace habitat. But it's so distant from those source populations or those potential source populations in Cienega Creek that they haven't been able to make it back here on their own. So we're basically giving them a helping hand to come back here.
Sometimes you gotta give a little nudge because they will try to shelter in it.
You know, it's exciting for longfin dace because we're bringing back some of the biocultural heritage that the city of Tucson had. You know, if you go back 110 years ago, there's a lot of reports of how abundant these fish were in the river before it dried up. So we're bringing some of that back. And, you know, longfin dace is a great species because it's not endangered, so people aren't, you know, worried about it legally yet, but it is one of those things that is disappearing as places dry up from drought, small streams dry up from drought across Arizona. So the more populations we can support and enhance in places like the Santa Cruz River that aren't going to dry up, we're basically kind of putting money in the bank so this species doesn't become endangered in the future. So it's been, you know, almost 110 years to the date that we've seen dace happily swimming in the river downtown. So that in and of itself is something to celebrate, to bring a species back after an entire century of being gone.